Okay, welcome to Geoguessr Simplified, the weekly series where I break down metas in Geoguessr and show you how to use them in-game. This week I'll be doing Canadian Bollards. Really simple, really straightforward. Hopefully it'll be a really short video. I post these every Friday, so do consider subscribing if this is content you are interested in. And with that, let's get into it. Canada in general uses different bollards than the United States, so that is probably one of the most useful tips. So if you can identify it as a Canada bollard, you can know not to go US. And likewise, if you know what US bollards look like, you know not to go to Canada. Starting off with Yukon, I don't think there are any bollards. I'm gonna hope that's true. So move to BC. BC likes to have these white ones with this little top, kind of similar to some US ones. So I've seen this one trip people up a lot. It's also not very common. It's common for people to not know this one. So if you do know what BC bollards look like, you can actually get good scores. Additionally, they're also quite common in a yellow variant where this main shaft is white, but the top is yellow as well. They're not very common. I wouldn't be surprised if they're mainly in the Vancouver area. That is where I found this location, where the largest population is, so most needed for bollards, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Moving on to Alberta. This is probably the most famous bollard in Canada, and if you know anything about Canada, you probably know this bollard. It's white with the black, white, black sort of pattern. It can come in yellow instead of white, just like the other one, but that's a lot more rare. And I didn't really find one when looking and didn't want to look anymore. But it's also important to know that this can be commonly confused with bollards in other states. I also believe this white part's a wrap around the black thing, right? It's wrapped around a black section. So at times the white part can come unwrapped and it can look like bollards in Manitoba without this white section. But you get them at almost every single intersection in Canada, which is extremely helpful because if you're at an intersection and you don't see bollards, maybe don't consider Alberta, although I'm sure there are intersections without bollards. Next, we have the Northwest Territory bollards, which are very similar to Alberta's. And are often you see this, you just think Alberta with the bollard, but they actually usually have a smaller section of white. It's not as thick. So that's one way to differentiate it with the landscape. So do consider Northwest Territories when you see an Alberta style bollard. It is usually thinner white section, but it can look very similar. So next we do have Manitoba, which is just basically the Alberta bollard without the white wrap around it, which is why when the white wrap can come undone, it can look like the Manitoba one. I will also say that you do get bollards in Saskatchewan, but I couldn't find any and didn't want to look any longer, but they, I believe they look similar to Sask and Manitoba's. Like I'm not 100% confident, but I'm pretty sure they might just be Alberta bollards. But they use them only at like railroads or like lakes and stuff. Like they're not gonna be at intersections like you see in Alberta. Very rarely if they are. But going back to Manitoba's, it's black tipped, but also have a wrap under it. So in this case, it's silver. That's pretty common. The orange one is also really common. But either way, quite a few variants of Manitoba, but they are pretty recognizable and decently common. Not as common as Alberta, but you do see them quite a bit. Ontario doesn't have an actual bollard like you're used to, but they do use this diamond shape. This one's on the end of guardrails, this green and white one, but really any sort of diamond shape is used as the bollard in Canada, which at times it can look pretty similar to US bollards. For example, this was literally the first highway in Ontario I looked at, and we had these yellow ones. These look really similar to US bollards. So Ontario itself can have bollards pretty similar to the US, and it's good not to get baited, but they're usually always diamond shaped. That's just the general pattern, and they come in different colors and stuff. These are Quebec bollards. I think they're pretty well known. They like to go on top of guardrails. It's white with this red section. It can also be green, but that's a lot less common. It's usually just red. These can be very useful from far away because you can just see the guardrails lined with them. So you can recognize Quebec just from the guardrail, essentially. But yeah, this one's really distinct. And here's also one with 2 red sections, so that's also possible. And then here's one I found also in Quebec with 3 red sections. So yeah, it's kind of the overall shape and color. 1 to 3, I don't know, you can get quite a few of red sections, but yeah, can be quite helpful. Also, I just remembered, I think there's like similar ones in New England as well. Can't remember what they look like off the top of my head, but So do you make sure they're actually Quebec bollards? Okay, next we get to New Brunswick, which doesn't really have like consistent bollards. In fact, the first 4 bollards I found in New Brunswick were all different. Here's an orange stick with 2 little sections in the middle. Here's a yellow one with a yellow section, pretty generic, almost US bollard-esque. Here's a green one with a white dot or white square. And here's another sort of like reddish with a red section. Overall, see, not very consistent. I don't think there's really consistent meta, not that I know of at least. However, they do like to go on the end of guardrails. So that is something to note. Not every state they will usually have a bollard at the end of the guardrail, but it won't be a Quebec one and it won't be a Ontario one. So that's a good way to differentiate New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. So yeah, overall variance in New Brunswick bollards, but they do tend to go on the end of guardrails. Here's a Nova Scotia bollard looking, I don't even know if this is like similar to one we had in New Brunswick. It's green. I think the most common one would be this one, which is yellow with the red. That one's decently common, but just like New Brunswick, they usually only use bollards like at the front of guardrails and stuff. So otherwise, you're pretty rare and uncommon and really unnecessary to learn. And lastly, we have Newfie. This is also on guardrails, really, and I think that's it. You get some like weird wooden sticks. Like this isn't even consistent, generic reflector, but just it is good to know that there are some bollards in Newfie, but they're pretty inconsistent. And usually, I mean, looking around, you should try to learn the landscape before you try to learn the bollards on this, because this is a pretty unique landscape in the world. Pretty unique to Newfie. So that's the video. If you enjoyed it, do consider subscribing, but otherwise, I'll see you next Friday. Also, one last bonus. I found these while looking. I've never seen these before in my life. I thought they were pretty cool. Some weird wood or stone pillars on the side of the road in Newfie. Anyways.